Hi kids, it's Granny, and it's time for Storytime Sunday, I guess, 'cause it's Sunday. Um, where we left off was about 1976, something like that, when my grandpa was killed. And, I was talking a little bit about how I got pretty heavy into drugs at a young age. And I thought maybe a little bit of explanation was necessary as to why I turned from an innocent little tomboy into this wild child at 15. I was molested at 14, and the way that happened, and I really have no difficulty talking about it at this point, it's like so way far in the past. I had a little boyfriend, but all we had ever done was hold hands. That was the extent of it, and we did that for like a whole year. We just held hands. But at some point during that school year, when I was 14, there was a radio station that my boyfriend and me and Carol would all listen to. This radio station. And sometimes they had contests, but the main thing was that you could call in, and we enjoyed hearing each other on the radio, right, when we would call into this show. It was a radio show that was jazz music, and I have never been fond of jazz music, but since my boyfriend listened to the show and he called in, I thought, this is something I have to do. So I started calling in to the radio show too, and we'd all be on the radio. Cool, everything's groovy. Well, if you called while the DJ was actually speaking into his microphone and was live on air, instead of talking to him immediately, you would get routed through to his assistant, I guess, who ran I don't know if they even had computers. And they must have had some kind of, I don't know. Was anything digital in 1974? I don't really know what he did. But there was this guy, 23-year-old guy, who worked for this radio station, directing calls. Let's just say that. So Carol and I started kind of flirting with this guy. I guess me primarily. He was 23. He had a really sexy voice. And, to me, this is just like an older man. It's kind of like really neat that he thinks I'm interesting. And that's really all it was for me. It's just that I was very flattered that this older guy found me somehow intriguing. Because I was at a really awkward stage. Just at that awkward age. So in talking to him on the phone one night, he asked me if I would call him at home later on. And so late that night, after I'd gone to bed, I pick up the phone and I call this guy, and we chatted like for a long time. And I decided, I really liked him and I really wanted to meet him. And when we discovered that we were both really into old Monkees albums, I don't know how many of you know about the Monkees, but I was big into the Monkees as a child. By the time 1974 came along, the Monkees were kind of has-beens, but I still really loved their music. Well, he did too. And I had a couple of Monkees albums that he didn't have. He'd been telling me about this record collection that he had, his etchings, whatever. He had all these, I don't know what he said, 2,000 albums or some crazy thing. So he wanted to borrow 2 of my Monkees albums. This is all so innocent. So he says, can you meet me, at local convenience store that was near my home. I could walk to it. I didn't have a driver's license yet, obviously. And could you bring the Monkees albums and let me borrow them? Still, totally innocent. I take the Monkees albums. I told my mom, you know, I'm going to go loan these Monkees albums to a friend. I think I even told her that it was like, you know, this DJ, because he did DJ in the hours that he wasn't answering the phone, and that he was 23. And I don't remember my mother expressing a whole lot of concern because I was just loaning him record albums. Not a big deal. So I walked down to the store. He pulls up in his car, and he was not what I had pictured, like, at all. I was picturing this really good-looking guy in a cowboy hat, and I don't know why, the cowboy hat, that was my little 14-year-old fantasy, I guess. And he shows up, and he was pretty morbidly obese. Not that great looking, not bad looking, but not great looking. And, you know, my immediate thought was, oh, okay, you know, thought I was, you know, I thought I was going to meet somebody really sexy, and you're not what I expected, but I didn't say any of this, right? Of course not. I didn't say any of this. So I sit in the front seat with him, and we talk about the albums briefly, and I'm like handing them to him. And he goes, do you want to see my record collection? Do you want to see my record collection? And I said, no, you know, I have to go home. I told my mom I'd be right back. He said, it's only going to take a few minutes. You know, I'll just run you down there, show you around, and you can come back. I'll drive you back. And I hadn't learned yet. I don't know. An older girl would have seen right through that. I was a kid. I was 14. I didn't see through it at all. So he takes me down into Oakland to his apartment. We walk in. I swear it looked like a woman lived there, but that's beside the point. I don't know who was in his life at the time. But he did have an enormous record collection. And so, you know, I looked at his records, and then I'm like ready to go, and I'm starting to feel just a little uncomfortable. Then he kissed me, and I didn't know how to say, I'm not attracted to you, I don't want to kiss you. It just kind of happened. And, you know, when you're 14, your body responds to things that it shouldn't necessarily respond to, and my little hormones just kind of went a little nuts for a minute, and the next thing you know, he was teaching me things that no 14-year-old girl should learn and how to do them. And I was extremely uncomfortable. I just wanted to go home, and I didn't know how to say that. I had no idea how to say that. So I let this happen, and I think what I just kept saying to myself was, it's okay, you're a grown-up now. This is what being a grown-up is. This is, you know, now you're a woman, and so that makes it okay. But I wasn't a woman. And he took me back to the convenience store where he had picked me up, and I walked home, and I didn't say anything to my mom because I thought I'd be in trouble. I totally thought, you know, this was my fault. I got myself in this situation, and it wasn't good, and Mom is going to get really upset. Dad will probably go kill this guy, and so I just kept it to myself. Didn't even think of it as an assault until, you know, years later, looking back, and I thought, oh my God, he totally took advantage of a really young person. And that wasn't very cool. So, that was that story. So I just kind of wanted to give you an idea of what might have triggered my descent into madness at 15 years old. I mean, it wasn't a descent into madness, but I did start trying everything. And it almost became my philosophy to try everything. I was starting to hear about all this wild stuff in the world. I mean, when you're little, they shelter you. And as you get older, you start hearing about things like prostitution, drug dealing, wild, weird, kinky sex. And I wanted to try it all. I wanted to try everything. And I did. There are some things that I did between 15 and 17 that I cannot share with you because I'm so ashamed of them. So we're going to move ahead just a little bit to 1977. I cut class a lot. Jeff and I together cut class a lot. And most of the time we just like hung out at his house, or we hung out in my Pinto and we smoked a lot of grass. Because that was way more interesting than high school. I wanted to like discuss philosophy and I don't know. It just seems like at times sitting in the park smoking pot, we were learning deeper things than we were learning in high school. If anybody here is listening and they're in high school, don't take this as advice to cut class. Do your philosophizing on the weekends, maybe. So anyway, we cut a lot of class. And when you were in trouble in my high school, what would happen is you'd be sitting in the middle of class, minding your own business, and somebody like a hall monitor or one of the kids, you know, that was, you know, they were like double agents. And they would come in and they would give you a blue slip. And if you got the blue slip, that was a dean slip. And that meant you had to go see the dean, which is like never a good thing. It's never a good thing. Unless you're like an A+ student, she wants to give you an award or something, but I don't think that would even happen. So you get these blue slips and you'd know you're up shit creek. So one day I get this blue slip and it says, see the dean. And then they had little check boxes. See the dean at your earliest convenience, see the dean after class, or see the dean immediately. My immediately box was checked. So I left class and I went to the dean's office and my mom was there. And Jeff was there. Jeff's mom wasn't there because Jeff's mom worked, so he got smooth out of that one. But the dean says, we need to address your attendance because it hadn't been very good. And she was telling me that if I didn't pass a particular class, I wasn't going to graduate and I better pull it together. And by the way, and she looked at Jeff and I and she says, you two hold the school record for cutting class. And she's all serious. And I look over at Jeff, and he looks at me, and it's like both of us are really stifling it because we want to go, yes! I mean, what an accomplishment! We held a school record for cutting class. We thought that was just magnificent. Wow, that was too cool. So I did wind up graduating. I passed whatever stupid algebra class it was, and I graduated high school with my class. Which brings me to the next little bit of this story. 1977, graduation from high school. There was lots of partying the night before graduation. Actually, that whole last semester was a lot of partying. And, I mean, everybody did it. The jocks did it, the cheerleaders did it. They had their beer parties, and the rest of us smoked our pot. But everybody was partying. We were so glad high school was ending. Yay! It was really cool. So, come graduation morning, we all are assembled to have the rehearsal for the graduation. And one of the jocks, like the most popular boy in school, I guess had gotten drunk the night before, and he was really hungover. So we're all in the bleachers, like standing like we're gonna, not in the bleachers, but in these, what do you call them? Yeah, they set up like bleachers for us to stand on, so we'd all be, you know, there, whatever. And this poor young man just pukes all over Lindsay Stansbury, who was standing in front of him, another really popular kid. She was like the head cheerleader or something. And I'm standing next to her. She got puke all over her. I was like clean. I was cool. And this girl who had never asked my advice for anything, I mean, I was a parky, she was a clubby. She looks over at me and she goes, "What do I do?" I guess she thought I had experience with people barfing on me. I don't know what she thought. But she asked me for advice. It was just poetic justice somehow. And I said, "I suggest you go change your clothes." And as I remember, that's just what she did. So we got through graduation. We all threw our little hats in the air. That was all cool. And then they put us on a bus. And they bussed us to the airport. And then they flew us on an airplane to Disneyland for grad night. And in California, I don't know, 50, 60 different high schools all send their graduating classes to Disneyland for this overnight thing. And they open Disneyland up just for that one night, just for the graduating seniors. So we got Disneyland like to ourselves all night. There were chaperones. There were some adults present. But, you know, everything was free. And I mean, our parents had to pay, I guess, to send us. But my boyfriend at the time, Mr. Nonconformist, didn't want to go to prom, didn't want to go to grad night. So I went with Jeff, and Jeff was like the greatest date ever. We had so much fun. Oh my gosh. I brought grass. We flew on an airplane with grass. This is 1977. Nobody said a word. We get to Disneyland, and we've got this grass, right? But there's chaperones, and you can't just like stand there and smoke pot. So we went on the Alice in Wonderland ride, which is one of those tunnel rides. You know, it goes real slow through a tunnel. Really boring ride. So we get in there, and we're smoking one joint after another going through Alice in Wonderland. And after probably 3 trips through Alice in Wonderland, the ride attendant, you know, he looks at us, and he's like, "Having fun in there?" And we realized that what he thought was that we were a couple and that we were necking in there. That's what he thought. Jeff puts his arm around me and winks at the guy. It was great. We went on Alice in Wonderland so many times that night. Carol was determined to go on Space Mountain. Space Mountain had only been open for like a few months. It was the biggest deal at Disneyland. But the line, even just on grad night with just the high school seniors there, the line was like an hour to stand in line to wait to go on this ride. And Jeff and I thought, we're not going to spend our whole time at Disneyland standing in line for a ride. So poor Carol, we kind of left her in the dust, or left her with other people, and she got her ride on Space Mountain. I guess it was cool. We skipped it. But I'll tell you, that trip was so fun. On the airplane home, we were so tired. Oh my God, we'd been up all night. And you know how things get kind of a little hallucinogenic and weird when you've been up all night, especially when you've been up all night smoking weed? And Jeff tells me that I looked over at him at one point with half-closed eyes and said, "Are we at Great America yet?" I didn't even know where I was. Yeah, grad night, Disneyland, 1977. That was something. So I've told you a lot of stories tonight. Gosh, there's still so many more. And I really thank you for listening. You're very patient people. I'm glad you've got a fast forward button if you need it. And I love you guys. I hope the rest of your weekend is wonderful. And I'll see you in the next couple of days with something wacky, wild, and wonderful. Love ya. Bye.